March 14th, 1932, 2:30 p.m. The conservatory of the mansion at 900 East Avenue, Rochester, New York. Pale afternoon light filters through the glass ceiling of the two-story marble conservatory, casting geometric shadows across polished floors that have known the footsteps of presidents, industrialists, and artists. The air hangs heavy with the scent of roses from the adjoining greenhouse. Somewhere in the walls, hidden behind ornate panels, the silent pipes of 40-rank Aeolian organ wait for music that will never come again. The temperature outside hovers at 38 degrees. A typical gray March day in upstate New York. Nothing suggests that in moments, one of America's greatest entrepreneurs will cease to exist. George Eastman sits at his desk, 77 years old, worth over $100 million, equivalent to more than $2 billion today. The man who put a camera in every hand. The man who democratized memory itself. But if you look closely at his face, you see something the numbers cannot capture. The tightness around his mouth. The way his hand trembles slightly as he picks up his pen. The wheelchair position nearby, a daily reminder of his diminishing autonomy. He writes in careful script on a single sheet of paper. To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? 14 words. The brevity of a man who built an empire on simplicity. You press the button, we do the rest. That was his promise to the world. Now he makes another promise. This one to himself. He dismisses his doctor and nurses from the room. They exit reluctantly, concern etched on their faces. They have watched him deteriorate over the past 4 years, watched as progressive spinal stenosis transformed a vigorous man into a prisoner of his own failing body. The pain, constant and excruciating, radiating from his lower spine through his legs. The humiliation of needing assistance to stand, to walk, to perform the simplest tasks that he once accomplished with brisk efficiency. The door clicks shut. George Eastman removes a Luger pistol from his desk drawer. The cold metal feels foreign in his hand, yet he holds it with the same deliberate precision he once applied to coating glass plates with photographic emulsion in his mother's kitchen. He stands, slowly, painfully. One last act of will. One final decision executed with the same ruthless efficiency that built the Eastman Kodak Company. He places a barrel against his chest, directly over his heart. A single shot echoes through 35,000 square feet of colonial revival grandeur, through 50 rooms filled with museum-quality furniture, through hallways lined with paintings, through a library containing thousands of volumes he will never read again. The sound reverberates off marble walls, travels past the silent conservatory where he once ate breakfast, while an organist played Bach from the concealed chambers above. It reaches the gardens outside, where 12 acres of meticulously maintained ground stretch toward a city that he helped to build. The nurses rush back in. Too late. George Eastman lies on the floor, the note beside him, his expression finally at peace. The pain has ended. The work, as he said, is done. But the story does not end here. It cannot end here. Because to understand this moment, to truly comprehend what led a self-made titan to choose such an ending, we must travel back. Back 50 years. Back 70 years. Back to a time when George Eastman was not a multimillionaire industrialist, but a boy who knew poverty, who watched his widowed mother taking boarders to keep food on the table, who dropped out of school at 14 not by choice but by necessity. The story begins not in this palatial mansion, but in a modest frame house in Waterville, New York. July 12, 1854. Maria Kilbourne Eastman, 28 years old, gives birth to her third child. They name him after his father, George Washington Eastman, who runs a small business college teaching bookkeeping and penmanship. For the first years of young George's life, the family enjoys modest comfort. Not wealth, but stability. The kind of middle-class security that feels permanent until it vanishes. Then, in 1862, everything collapses. George Washington Eastman dies suddenly. George is 8 years old. His father's business college dies with him, and the family's income evaporates overnight. Maria Eastman is left with 3 children, Ellen Maria, Katie, and young George, minimal savings, and a society that offers widows limited options. They move to Rochester, a growing industrial city, hoping for opportunity. What they find is hardship. Katie, George's older sister, suffers from polio. The medical bills pile up. Maria takes in boarders, transforming their home into a boarding house. Young George watches his mother work from dawn until late into the night, cooking, cleaning, managing the household finances with meticulous care. She never complains, never shows weakness. She simply does what must be done. This image, his mother's quiet determination in the face of adversity, will burn itself into George's consciousness, shaping every decision he will make for the rest of his life. At 14, George drops out of school. No ceremony, no graduation, just a quiet recognition that education is a luxury they cannot afford. He takes a job as an office boy at an insurance company, earning $3 per week. $3 to help feed a family. $3 that feels simultaneously like a fortune and an insult. He adds numbers in ledgers, runs errands, watches wealthier men come and go in their fine coats and polished shoes. He does not envy them. Exactly. He studies them, observes how they carry themselves, how they conduct business, how they leverage money to make more money. In 1870, tragedy strikes again. Katie, his sister, dies from complications related to her polio. She is only 20 years old. George, now 16, watches his mother's grief harden into something like steel. Maria Eastman has buried a husband and a daughter. She has 2 children left, Ella Maria, who has married and moved to Cleveland, and George. She cannot afford to fall apart. Neither can he. George finds a better position as a junior clerk at the Rochester Savings Bank, earning $5 per week, then eventually $15. He gives most of it to his mother. He lives frugally, almost monastically. No drinking, no gambling, no frivolous expenditures. Every penny counted. Every decision weighed against the specter of poverty that haunts the edges of their lives. But George has an advantage that many poor young men lack. He has his mind, sharp, analytical, relentlessly curious. He teaches himself accounting at night, poring over books by candlelight after his mother has gone to bed. He has inherited her discipline, her capacity for sustained effort in pursuit of a goal. By his early 20s, he has saved $5,000, a considerable sum, through sheer force of will and self-denial. In 1877, at age 23, George plans a vacation to Santo Domingo. One of his colleagues at the bank suggests he document the trip with photographs. Photography in the 1870s is not the simple point-and-shoot affair it will become. It is a cumbersome, expensive, highly technical process reserved for professionals and wealthy hobbyists. To take a photograph requires a complete portable darkroom, glass plates coated with wet collodion, toxic chemicals, and extensive knowledge of chemistry and optics. The equipment alone, camera, tripod plates, chemicals, tent, can weigh up to 50 pounds. George purchases equipment. He never makes a trip to Santo Domingo. Something else captures his attention entirely. Photography itself. The process fascinates him. But more than that, the inefficiency of the process offends him. Why should something so magical, the ability to capture reality itself, be so prohibitively complex? Why should only the wealthy and the technically skilled be able to create permanent images of the people and places they love? He begins experimenting in his mother's kitchen at night after his bank work. He coats glass plates with photographic emulsions, testing different formulas, different techniques. The kitchen becomes his laboratory. The acrid smell of chemicals fills the house. Maria, ever patient, never complains about the mess, the late hours, the obsessive focus her son brings to this strange new hobby. George learns about the dry plate process being developed in England, a method that would allow photographers to prepare plates in advance rather than coating them on site. He begins his own experiments, working with gelatin, silver bromide, and various chemical combinations. He fails repeatedly. Plates crack, emulsions separate, images blur. He adjusts, tries again, fails differently. The scientific method executed with the patience of a man who spent years adding numbers in ledger books. Finally, in 1880, after 3 years of experimentation, he succeeds. He develops a dry plate formula that works reliably. More importantly, he developed a machine to coat the plates uniformly and efficiently. Where other inventors focus on chemistry, George focuses on manufacturing. He understands instinctively that the innovation means nothing if it cannot be produced at scale, at a cost that makes commercial sense. He patents his process. Then, with the audacity that will define his career, he quits a secure bank job and forms the Eastman Dry Plate Company. He is 26 years old. He has no business experience. He has no formal education beyond the 8th grade. What he has is an absolute conviction that he has identified a problem. Photography is too complicated, and that he can solve it. The early years are brutal. He works 18-hour days mixing chemicals, coating plates, filling orders, managing accounts, and handling correspondence. He is manufacturer, chemist, salesman, and bookkeeper rolled into one relentlessly efficient package. He rents a small loft for production. Money is tight. One bad batch of plates could bankrupt him. The pressure is immense. He responds by working harder, sleeping less, pushing himself with a discipline that borders on inhuman. But the plates sell. Photographers appreciate the convenience of dry plates that can be purchased ready-made rather than prepared on location. The Eastman Dry Plate Company grows. George hires employees. He moves to a larger facility. In 1884, he expands into flexible film, developing a paper-based film that can be rolled rather than requiring individual glass plates for each exposure. This is the breakthrough. This is the innovation that will change everything. Because if film can be rolled, then cameras can be simplified. The entire darkroom process, the chemical knowledge, the technical expertise, all of it can be removed from the photographer and centralized in a factory. George sees the future with perfect clarity. A camera is simple enough that a child could operate it. Film that customers mail back to the company for developing. A complete system that transforms photography from an expert craft into a consumer product. In 1888, he introduces the Kodak camera. The name itself is his invention, a made-up word, short, memorable, pronounceable in any language. The camera is a plain black box, simple and elegant. It comes preloaded with enough film for 100 exposures. The advertising slogan is genius. You press the button, we do the rest. When the film is exhausted, customers mail the entire camera back to Eastman's company. The company develops the prints, reloads a camera, and returns everything for $10. The camera itself costs $25, expensive but within reach of the middle class. It is an instant sensation. Photography explodes from a niche technical pursuit into a mass-market phenomenon. Families photograph their children. Tourists photograph their vacations. Ordinary people capture ordinary moments that would otherwise vanish into the mists of memory. George Eastman has not just built a business. He has fundamentally altered human culture. Before Kodak, visual memory was the province of the wealthy, who could afford painted portraits or the occasional formal photograph. After Kodak, everyone becomes a curator of their own history. The money pours in. In 1889, George forms the Eastman Company. In 1892, it becomes the Eastman Kodak Company. The factory in Rochester expands, then expands again, then keeps expanding. He builds a massive industrial complex covering multiple city blocks. He employs thousands. He establishes overseas offices in London, Paris, Berlin. The Kodak brand becomes globally recognizable, one of the first true multinational corporations. By the turn of the century, George Eastman is rich, not comfortable, not well off, rich in a way that transforms a man into an institution. His personal wealth climbs into the tens of millions. He could retire, live off his investments, spend his days in leisure. But George Eastman is not wired for leisure. He is wired for work. He continues to oversee Kodak personally, involving himself in everything from chemical formulations to advertising campaigns. He introduces the Brownie camera in 1900, priced at just $1, making photography accessible even to working-class families and children. By 1905, Kodak dominates the global photography market, controlling patents, manufacturing, and distribution. And in that same year, 1905, George completes construction of his mansion at 900 East Avenue, Rochester. 50 rooms spread across 35,000 square feet. Colonial Revival architecture, designed by J. Foster Warner, based on the elegant root house in Buffalo. The total construction cost, $335,000, equivalent to roughly $9 million today. But this is just the beginning. George will spend decades modifying, expanding, perfecting his home until it becomes one of the most technologically advanced and aesthetically magnificent private residences in America. Let us walk through it. Let us see what George Eastman built with a fortune he earned from simplifying photography. Because this house is not merely a house. It is a physical manifestation of a self-made man's journey from poverty to power. It is a monument. It is a fortress. It is, in the end, a kind of trap. You approach from East Avenue, one of Rochester's most prestigious streets, lined with the mansions of industrialists, doctors, lawyers, the upper crust of a thriving manufacturing city. The Eastman estate stands out even among these grand homes. 12 acres of meticulously landscaped grounds. Gardens designed with the same precision George applies to everything else in his life. Flower beds geometrically arranged. Tree strategically placed. A dairy, an orchard, greenhouses bursting with rare plants and flowers. This is not merely a home. It is a self-contained world. The house itself is elegant but not ostentatious. Red brick exterior with white columns, symmetrical and balanced, classical American architecture that speaks of old money and established taste. George, the dropout son of a widow, has built a mansion that the oldest families in Rochester would envy. No garish displays of nouveau riche excess. Everything is tasteful, refined, expensive in ways that only experts would fully appreciate. You enter through massive double doors into a reception hall with soaring ceilings. Marble floors, imported from quarries in Italy, reflect the light from crystal chandeliers. The walls are paneled in rare woods, mahogany and oak, hand-carved with intricate details. But what strikes you immediately is the sense of space. High ceilings, wide hallways, rooms flowing into rooms. George, who grew up in crowded boarding houses, has built a home where you could walk for minutes without encountering another person. To the right, the formal living room. To the left, the library, floor-to-ceiling shelves filled with leather-bound volumes. George is a voracious reader, compensating for his truncated formal education with a lifetime of self-directed learning. Biography, history, science, philosophy. He reads the way he works, systematically, extracting useful information and discarding the rest. But the true heart of the house, the space that defines it, is a conservatory. A 2-story glass and marble atrium flooded with natural light. This is where George takes his breakfast every morning, surrounded by tropical plants and exotic flowers from the greenhouses. Palm trees rise toward the glass ceiling. Orchids bloom in carefully controlled microclimates. The air smells of earth and growing things. A private jungle in the middle of a New York winter. And hidden within the walls of this conservatory, invisible unless you know to look, are the pipes of the Aeolian organ. 40 ranks, 9 separate divisions installed in chambers throughout the second floor. The pipes arranged to create surround sound before the concept existed. 3-manual console with a roll-player mechanism containing 226 music rolls. A private orchestra at George's fingertips. He eats breakfast to the sounds of Bach, Mozart, Beethoven. The music swelling from hidden speakers to fill the marble space. George loves music, though he cannot play an instrument himself. He loves it the way he loves photography, for its ability to capture something ephemeral and make it repeatable, shareable, democratic. He hosts concerts in the conservatory, inviting musicians from around the world. He sits in his cane-back chair, eyes closed, letting the music wash over him. Upstairs, the bedrooms. George's own master suite is spacious, but relatively simple. A large bed, custom-made furniture, a private bathroom with running water, and modern plumbing that was still a luxury in 1905. But notably absent is any feminine touch. George Eastman never marries. This fact, unremarkable to some, strikes others as curious. A man of his wealth and position, choosing to remain alone. There are rumors, whispers, speculation. But George keeps his personal life intensely private. He surrounds himself with close friends, both men and women, but maintains an emotional distance that few penetrate. His niece, Ellen Anders Dryden, daughter of his sister Ella Maria, becomes one of the few people he allows into his inner circle. He is not an affectionate man in the conventional sense, but he provides for his niece's family pays for their education, includes them in his will. Family duty, executed with the same methodical efficiency he applies to everything else. The mansion includes innovations that astonish visitors. A complete internal telephone system connecting every room. Electrical lighting throughout. Controlled by switches at a time when many homes still relied on gas lamps. A central heating system. Invisible radiators built into the walls. Hot and cold running water. Multiple bathrooms. A rarity even in mansions of that era. The basement houses mechanical systems. The furnace, the water heaters, and, reportedly, George's personal photography darkroom. Even in his palace, he cannot quite leave behind a chemical-stained space where his fortune was born. In 1919, George undertakes a massive renovation to expand the conservatory. He literally cuts the house in half, physically separates the two sections, and moves the back half of the building to create a larger, more acoustically perfect space for his organ. The project cost $750,000, more than twice the original construction cost of the entire house. It takes 3 months. George oversees every detail personally. The conservatory, once square, becomes oblong, improving the acoustics, allowing the organ music to resonate more beautifully. He spares no expense to create the perfect listening environment. The mansion becomes a social center. George hosts dinners for scientists, artists, business leaders. He hires a full-time organist to play during breakfast and dinner. He employs a staff of dozens, gardeners, cooks, maids, chauffeurs, personal secretaries. The house operates like a luxury hotel, everything running with clockwork precision under George's exacting management. But here is the strange thing, the contradiction at the heart of George Eastman's life. He builds this magnificent house, fills it with beauty and technology, hosts countless guests. Yet he remains, in some essential way, alone. He never marries, never has children, never allows anyone fully into the fortress of his emotional life. His closest relationship is with his mother, Maria, who lives with him in the mansion until her death in 1907. He is 53 years old when she dies, and those who know him say he is never quite the same afterward. The woman who shaped him, whose determination in the face of poverty gave him his template for living, is gone. After Maria's death, George throws himself into philanthropy with the same systematic intensity he once applied to building Kodak. He has more money than he could ever spend. The question becomes not how to make more, but what to do with what he has. His answer is characteristically methodical and farsighted. He gives $51 million to the University of Rochester, his adopted hometown. $51 million, equivalent to over $1 billion today. With this money, he establishes the Eastman School of Music, one of the premier music conservatories in the world. He funds the construction of a complete medical school and hospital. He creates the Eastman Theater, a palatial performance space with perfect acoustics. He transforms a respectable regional university into a nationally recognized institution. But here is the curious detail. George gives much of his money anonymously under the name Mr. Smith. He does not want recognition, does not want buildings named after him, does not want the spotlight. When his identity as Mr. Smith is eventually revealed, he is reportedly annoyed. Philanthropy for George is not about legacy or ego. It is about solving problems. Rochester needs a better university. He has the money, therefore he gives the money. Simple logic. He gives $20 million to the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, again anonymously at first. He establishes dental clinics for children in Rochester, London, Paris, Stockholm, Brussels, Rome. Not hospitals, dental clinics. The specificity is pure George. He has studied the problem and concluded that dental health is the most cost-effective way to improve children's overall well-being. He designs complete plans and financial backing for a $2.5 million dental clinic in Rochester. He personally reviews the clinic's procedures, the equipment, the staffing. Nothing is left to chance. By the late 1920s, George Eastman has given away the equivalent of over $2 billion in modern currency. He has built schools, hospitals, clinics. He has funded music programs, research laboratories, public parks. He has done more for Rochester than any single individual before or since. The city is, in many ways, his monument, more enduring than his mansion, more meaningful than his fortune. But money cannot buy everything. It cannot buy health. And in 1928, George begins to experience pain in his lower back. At first, it is manageable, annoying but not debilitating. He ignores it the way he has ignored physical discomfort his entire life. But the pain worsens, spreads down his legs, makes standing difficult, then agonizing. Walking becomes a challenge. The man who has controlled every aspect of his life through sheer force will confront an enemy that will not yield to determination. The doctors diagnose a progressive spinal stenosis, a degenerative disorder where the spinal canal narrows, compressing the nerves. There is no cure. The condition will only worsen. George Eastman, who built an empire on precision and control, is losing control of his own body. He, who watched his mother care for his polio-stricken sister, who saw firsthand what prolonged illness looks like, now faces his own version of that nightmare. He tries to continue his routines, the breakfasts in the conservatory, the organ concerts, the business meetings, but it becomes harder. He needs assistance to stand. A wheelchair becomes necessary. He, who prided himself on self-sufficiency, must rely on others for the most basic functions. The humiliation is, perhaps, worse than the pain, and the pain is extraordinary, chronic, unrelenting, piercing. This is the 1930s. Pain management is primitive by modern standards. Morphine and aspirin, nothing that truly addresses the underlying cause. He cannot sleep, cannot find a comfortable position. His world narrows to the boundaries of his suffering. Friends notice the change. The man who was always brisk, efficient, decisive, becomes quieter, more withdrawn. He continues his philanthropic work, making final arrangements for the institutions he has funded. He revises his will multiple times, ensuring that his money will continue to do good after he is gone. He meets with his niece, Ellen, and her family, puts affairs in order. On the evening of March 13th, 1932, George hosts a dinner party at the mansion. His guests include close friends and business associates. He is cordial, attentive, the perfect host. No one suspects that this is farewell. When the guests leave, they thank him for the lovely evening. He smiles, nods, and watches them depart. The next afternoon, March 14th, he summons his doctor and nurses. They help him with his routine. He seems calm, composed. Then he asks them to leave the conservatory. He wants to be alone for a moment. They hesitate. Something in his manner concerns them. But George Eastman is not a man you argue with. They exit. What goes through his mind in those final moments? Does he think of his mother, long dead, whose strength shaped him? Does he think of the thousands of children photographed with brownie cameras, family memories preserved because of his vision? Does he think of the music students at Eastman School, the medical students at the University of Rochester, the children receiving dental care in clinics across Europe? Does he think of the 50 rooms of his mansion, the marble conservatory, the Aeolian organ silent in its chambers? Or does he simply think, the work is done? Why wait? He writes his note, 14 words. To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? He removes the Luger pistol, stands, places the barrel against his heart, fires. The sound echoes through the empty rooms. The news spreads quickly through Rochester. George Eastman is dead. Suicide. The shock is profound. The wealthiest man in the city, one of the most successful entrepreneurs in American history, has taken his own life. The newspapers struggle to make sense of it. Some focus on the spinal disease, framing it as a tragic end to a chronic illness. Others hint at deeper psychological factors, depression, loneliness. The truth, as always, is complex. George Eastman's funeral is held at the mansion. Thousands attend or line the streets outside. Business leaders, politicians, university officials, Kodak employees, ordinary citizens whose lives were touched by his inventions or his generosity. The Eastman Kodak Company closes for the day. Flags across Rochester fly at half-mast. He is buried in the family plot at Kodak Park Cemetery, a small, private burial ground he established for himself and his employees. In death, as in life, he chooses to be among the people who work for him rather than in some grand mausoleum removed from the common man. His will distributes the remainder of his fortune according to his carefully laid plans. The University of Rochester receives additional millions. MIT receives additional millions. His niece, Ellen Anders Dryden, receives a substantial inheritance, as do her children. His employees at Kodak receive bequests. Almost nothing is frivolous. Every dollar is allocated to some productive purpose. The mansion stands empty for 17 years. Ellen and her family occasionally visit, but it is too large, too expensive, too filled with George's presence to serve as a family home. The gardens begin to grow wild. Dust accumulates on the marble floors. The Aeolian organ falls silent, its mechanical components gradually deteriorating from disuse. In 1947, Ellen and her family donate the mansion and the 11 remaining acres to the University of Rochester. It is what George would have wanted. Nothing wasted, everything put to use. In 1949, the university opens the George Eastman House as a museum dedicated to photography and film. The mansion becomes a shrine to the man and the medium he revolutionized. His bedroom, his library, his conservatory, all are preserved and open to the public. Over the decades, the museum expands. A modern wing is added to house the world's preeminent collection of photographs, cameras, and film equipment. But the heart of the museum remains a mansion itself, the 50 rooms where George Eastman lived and died. Visitors walk through the conservatory where he ate breakfast. They see the library where he read. They stand in the room where he ended his life. The note, 14 words, is displayed in a frame. My work is done. Why wait? Today, the George Eastman Museum at 900 East Avenue is one of the most important photography institutions in the world. Scholars come from across the globe to study its collections. Tourists visit to see how one man's vision transformed an entire art form. The mansion has been meticulously restored. In 2013, the Aeolian organ was restored to full working order. Its 40 ranks of pipes once again fill in conservatory with music. Concerts are held regularly. The sound swells exactly as George intended, rising from hidden chambers, enveloping listeners in waves of precisely engineered beauty. The gardens have been replanted according to historical photographs. The greenhouses rebuilt. You can stand in the conservatory on a winter morning, surrounded by tropical plants and marble columns, and hear Bach exactly as George heard it nearly a century ago. The mansion is alive again, serving a purpose, educating and inspiring, just as its creator would have wanted. And what of Kodak, the company George built? Its story is both triumph and tragedy. For most of the 20th century, Eastman Kodak dominated the photography industry. Kodak film, Kodak cameras, Kodak processing. The yellow boxes were ubiquitous, synonymous with capturing life's moments. Kodak moment entered the language as a shorthand for any scene worth preserving. But the company George built on innovation eventually became resistant to the very thing that made it great. When digital photography emerged in the 1990s, Kodak hesitated. The executives, comfortable with the film business that generated enormous profits, were slow to embrace the new technology. Ironically, Kodak engineers actually invented one of the first digital cameras in 1975, but the company suppressed it, fearing it would cannibalize film sales. George Eastman, who built his empire by disrupting the existing photography industry, would have been appalled. By the early 2000s, digital photography had decimated the film market. Kodak, once an untouchable giant, struggled. The company filed for bankruptcy in 2012, 80 years after George's death. It emerged as a much smaller entity focused on commercial printing and packaging. The yellow boxes vanished from store shelves. A new generation grew up never holding a roll of film. But here is the thing. George Eastman's vision, photography for everyone, succeeded beyond even his grandest dreams. Today, billions of people carry cameras in their pockets. Phone cameras capable of capturing images that would have astounded professional photographers of George's era. Every day, humans take more photographs than were taken in the entire first century of photography's existence. We are drowning in images, curating our lives in real time, documenting every meal, every sunset, every smile. This is George Eastman's true legacy, not the company that bore his name, not the mansion on East Avenue, but the fundamental democratization of visual memory. The idea that your life, anyone's life, is worth documenting, that your family, your moments, your perspective matters enough to be preserved. In a very real sense, we are all George Eastman's children pressing buttons, letting someone else do the rest, turning the mundane miracle of existence into permanent evidence that we were here. And yet, standing in that conservatory, looking at the frame that holds his final note, you cannot help but wonder, did George Eastman, for all his genius, for all his wealth, for all the millions of lives he touched and improved, did he ever find what he was looking for? Did the mansion fill the void left by a childhood shadowed by poverty? Did the accolades replace a father who died too soon? Did the millions given away salve the loneliness of a man who built walls higher than anyone could climb? The note gives no answers. My work is done. Why wait? 14 words that could be read as peaceful acceptance or existential despair. A life reduced to work. And when the work ends, nothing remaining that makes waiting worthwhile. No spouse, no children, no intimate relationships that transcend duty and business. Just rooms full of beautiful things and silence broken only by the mechanical music of an organ playing to an audience of one. Perhaps that is the final lesson of George Eastman's life. That success and significance are not the same thing. That you can change the world, democratize art, build institutions that outlive you by generations, and still die alone in a mansion that feels like a mausoleum. That the most profound human needs, connection, meaning, love cannot be solved like engineering problems or addressed through methodical philanthropy. Or perhaps the lesson is simpler. That pain, unrelenting physical anguish, can break even the strongest will. That there is dignity in choosing your own end when life becomes nothing but suffering. That my work is done is not despair, but truth. George Eastman accomplished more in 77 years than most people could in 10 lifetimes. When illness took away his ability to work, to contribute, to execute his vision, he made one final decision with the same clarity he brought to every other aspect of his existence. The mansion stands as testament to both interpretations. Walk through its 50 rooms and you see genius, vision, taste, generosity. You see a boy from poverty who built an empire and gave it away. You see innovation that changed human culture. But you also see a house built for dozens that sheltered one. You see bedrooms that never held a family. You see a conservatory designed for concerts that more often played to empty chairs. Today, the mansion is never empty. School groups tour the photography exhibits. Concert goers fill the conservatory to hear the restored organ. Researchers examine the archives. The building buzzes with life and purpose. It is found, in its afterlife as a museum, the vibrancy that perhaps eluded it when it was merely a private residence. George would approve. He hated waste. A 50-room mansion serving the public, educating thousands, is infinitely more efficient than the same mansion serving one. And perhaps that is the most fitting epilogue. That George Eastman's home, like his inventions, like his philanthropic institutions, continues to serve. That the marble conservatory where he died is now a space where musicians perform, where students learn, where visitors from around the world pause and wonder. That the private fortress has become a public treasure. That the work, in the deepest sense, is not done at all. It continues. It echoes. It ripples forward through time. Because every photograph taken today, every casual snap of phone camera, every image shared across social networks, carries within the DNA of George Eastman's vision. You press the button. Someone, somewhere does the rest. The technology has evolved beyond recognition, but the fundamental promise remains. Your life matters. Your memories matter. The faces you love, the places you go, the moments you experience, all of it deserves to be remembered. That is what George Eastman gave us. Not just cameras, not just film, but the idea that ordinary life is extraordinary enough to preserve. That you do not need to be wealthy or powerful or technically skilled to capture beauty. That the play of light on a child's face, the geometry of a city street, the fleeting expression of joy or sorrow, all of it can be held frozen, kept safe against a relentless erosion of time. He gave us this gift, and then, when pain made the giving impossible, when his body betrayed him and his work was done, he left, abruptly, efficiently, with 14 words of explanation and no apology. Because George Eastman owed the world nothing more. He had already given everything that mattered. The mansion at 900 East Avenue stands as his monument. Not a tomb, but a living institution. The marble still gleams. The organ still plays. The gardens still bloom. And in the conservatory, in a small frame on the wall, 14 words remain. To my friends, my work is done. Why wait? Those words are perhaps the most honest thing George Eastman ever wrote. No marketing slogan. No business plan. No philanthropic mission statement. Just the simple truth of a man who had accomplished everything he set out to do and found himself with nothing left but pain. And yet, walking through his mansion today, listening to music swell from hidden organ pipes, seeing families examine vintage cameras and children wonder at black and white photographs of strangers who lived a century ago, you realize that George Eastman was both right and wrong. His work was done. But the impact of that work, the resonance, the ongoing transformation of human experience, that work continues, will continue, must continue as long as people seek to hold moments against the void. This is the paradox of legacy. George Eastman died alone in pain, having chosen to end his story on his own terms. But the story did not end. It expanded. It multiplied. It became woven into the fabric of how humans relate to time and memory. He is dead. The work lives. And perhaps in the end, that is enough. Perhaps that is all anyone can hope for. To leave the world different than you found it. To solve problems that made life harder for millions. To give away more than you kept. To create institutions that outlast your own brief flicker of consciousness. George Eastman did all of that. He rose from poverty to become one of the wealthiest men in America. He invented technologies that changed human culture. He gave away the equivalent of billions of dollars. He built a mansion that became a museum. He made memory democratic. And when his body failed him, when pain became intolerable and his capacity for work was gone, he wrote 14 words and ended it. No apologies, no regrets, just a simple accounting. The work is done. Why wait? Perhaps we should honor him by asking ourselves the same question. Is our work done? And if not, what are we waiting for? The clock ticks. The light fades. The moments slip away. But we can capture them, preserve them, hold them against the darkness. Because of a boy from Waterville who dropped out of school at 14 and changed the world. You press the button. History does the rest.